My name is Abby. I'm going to be moderating today. We're very happy to have you guys here. I'm glad that you guys made it out at the end of Blockchain Week. I know everybody's probably exhausted from everything that has happened this week. I know I am, so appreciate it. Oh, okay. Even for this? Okay. Do you want me to repeat everything I just said? Okay, great. Because I can do it word for word. Cool. So we're really excited to host people at our new office that we just moved into about a month ago, which is really awesome, and have a conversation, a discussion with all of you guys, not just a panel, about free/Libre. Richard Stallman gave us an issue with that one, and open source sustainability. So I'm really excited to just jump into the conversation. So I think that we'll chat for maybe like 30, 45 minutes, and then we can just kind of do general Q&A discussion, and then break out into food and drinks and stuff like that. Does that sound good to you guys? You guys ready? Do you guys need alcohol? Great. Cool. So I have to put my mic on. But I'll introduce myself first. My name's Abby. I'm super excited about this conversation today, as I've been kind of, figuring out different things on sustainability for a little bit with my work. I mean, I started out as a VC in open source, like working under people investing in open source, and then most recently worked with a project called the Common Stack, which is all about building new sustainable organizational structures using cryptoeconomics and token engineering. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys today and hear from all of you guys. But I think a good start would be to for you guys to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your background, kind of like what got you into open source. Or whatever you're doing now for open source, and then a little bit about what you're building towards and with, what kind of, what are you building for with open source sustainability? So.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm Dandelion. I use they, them pronouns. So I've had the privilege of working on open source software my entire career. Which really shows actually the power of the corporate sponsored open source, because I was working at different companies that were sponsoring open source projects such as TensorFlow. Now I'm more like on the rogue, truly free software side, building source cred. And the mission that what I envision is an economy that is transitioning out of de facto closed source mode, where people come up with ideas and patent them and vigorously protect them, into a world where humanity's shared knowledge is free by default, where that empowers everyone, where that means that everyone is free to create things, everyone is free to fork them, try to change them. And I think what we've seen so far in open source is that, in some sense, it's a far more dynamic and intellectually flourishing approach to making software. So much so that even though people often don't get paid for making open source software, it winds up being better and more widespread and more usable. I think what's missing is the incentives that really reward people for working on these projects, and then invite more and more people in who need to be making money from their day jobs to be still releasing that software for free. So I'm really interested in how we can apply the new technologies of crypto into making a really flourishing, sustainable open source economy. The first step that I'm personally focused on is essentially figuring out how to measure the value that people are contributing to open source. If we can't measure that value, then it's really difficult to reward people for working on open source in a way that won't immediately turn into gaming or finger pointing or broken incentives. So SourceCred, the project I'm focused on, is just trying to find good systems for quantitatively assessing the value of contributions that people make.
Great.
Nice.
Cool. Hey, from me, my name is Eleftherios. I'm a statistician by training. I learned how to code when I was younger, and then I've been in the open source space for maybe the last 15 years. So basically, first as a user, then as a statistician, getting into the whole data science world. When I was getting out of college, basically the whole data science term was becoming a thing. So ended up doing a lot of work with data and code, and primarily using and contributing in those ecosystems. And then more recently, 2 years now ago, basically 2 years ago, together with my founder Alex, that's sitting there in the back, we quit our jobs and we decided to pursue a vision for building a decentralized network for code collaboration and value exchange in open source communities. What came from that, there are two projects that we're currently working on. The one we call Radical, and Radical is a decentralized alternative to GitHub using IPFS as the storage layer. And we released that in March, right? Yeah, in March. We got it out in March, got good traction, people start hacking on it. Still, it's alpha, it's unstable, but the promise is there. A lot of people start contributing to that. So that's one piece of work that we're doing. This is peer-to-peer, offline first, free software, right? You don't need to pay, you don't need to for that thing. And then in addition, basically we work on OSCoin, and OSCoin, you can think of it as providing more convenience around the Radical world, and also providing economic incentives for different actors within this open source network. I'm going to pause here, and we're going to zoom in on sustainability and like what we do on that, where we stand on that later, I guess. Yeah.
Cool.
That's the goal to you.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, I'm Kevin Owaki. I'm one of the co-founders of Gitcoin, and we are a Ethereum-based network organized around the mission of growing and sustaining open source software. I've used open source software for the last 12 years since I've been in tech startups. Everything that I've done in tech startups has been using open source web servers and open source database servers and just standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think that the value created by open source software is way higher than the value that's captured from the people who are working on it. And it's just one of those fundamental injustices that it's a wrong that needs righting. And I think that the timing is right for projects like OSCoin and SourceCred and Gitcoin and Open Collective to make a play to right that wrong, because now we have blockchain, and so we have all of this market capitalization that needs access to software developers. And for the first time, all the money that was building the financial system that used to go to Wall Street, to some back office on Wall Street, is now going to open source software. So there's quite an interesting opportunity, new capital coming in to right this wrong. Our product that we sell is, well, we have a few different products that are designed from first principles to help users of open source become contributors, become maintainers. But the one that we're most focused on right now is hackathons. So if you follow Gitcoin on Twitter, you've seen that we're doing virtual hackathons in partnership with Ethereal or in partnership with Microsoft, maybe in partnership with some other people on this stage sometime soon. And we basically just want to catalyze developers finding work in the open source blockchain ecosystem, and virtual hackathons are a great vehicle to do that, because you can participate from anywhere, and regardless of if you're just breaking into the space or you have a corporate job that you want to get out of, hackathons are a great way to try before you buy access, or working with an employer or working with a hackathon. So we're pretty focused on helping funders find access to developers, and developers to find access to funders in the open source space. We're going to cross $2 million in platform value in the next month or so. So $2 million worth of tokens that have gone to software development in the open source space, and super proud of providing that value to open source developers.
Nice. That's really great. So I think that to start off this conversation, I think a good level set is to kind of like define sustainability, right? Sustainability is a word that Richard Stallman hated when we were chatting with him about it, but it's also something that people equate to money a lot, and I feel like sustainability is kind of more of a loaded term that has more definition, but that's my personal opinion. So I'm wondering, how do you define sustainability in your own words, or what vision of sustainability are you building towards? Whoever wants to start, jump in.
It's a great question. So the easy way to think about sustainability is like potentially you have something and you want to keep doing that thing, right? Like you want to keep moving forward in a very explain like I'm 5. Now getting a little bit more sophisticated with that is, I think when we're talking about sustainability with free software communities, we're talking about the ability to maintain, preserve, and evolve the values that communities carry with them. right? So if you think about free software, like specifically and Stallman's, as you bring the name up. So he defined free software with these 4 freedoms, pretty much, right? To read, modify, distribute, and redistribute, I guess, is the 4th one. So in that sense, basically, sustainability is defined as allowing people to continue to pursue communities around these values in the future, right? And where things actually get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more complicated is that, we saw for many years that, money and these type of values were in conflict, right? I think what happened with the open source, with the open source movement, came and pretty much, like as Stallman says, is like, made these values a little bit more neutral. They are there, but we can integrate, like we can play with money and them. And I think what the crypto promise is around is actually potentially like, finding a business model without actually compromising on some of these values. That potentially probably that's what actually happened with open source and money, coming in conflict. So it's more like sustainability around like basically the ability to pursue values and continue pursuing them moving forward, rather than money per se. Money is a component of that, obviously, right? And yeah, I'm gonna pause here.
Yeah.
We can give it a go. Yes.
What do you guys think?
I agree with Ellie's definition. Sustainability is the ability to keep doing something that you're doing, and like I said, there's an asymmetry between value created in open source and the value that's able to be captured, and it results in software contributors and maintainers getting burnt out, stopping maintaining their repositories. And I think that if software developers who have created a ton of value for the world are able to pay their mortgage and pay for their kids' education by the work that they've done that creates value, then that's a more sustainable world. And I agree that sustainability is multidimensional. Sustainability of our values, sustainability in a lot of other vectors, but I think that financial sustainability is one of the higher order bits, and we should be talking about that with a priority.
So I'm going to be a contrarian.
Nice.
And say that I think we should be setting our sights far higher than sustainability. Specifically, I think right now the dominant mode of open source is things that are complementary to developer productivity and complementary to the ability of mega corporations to extract value from software systems. So I think that where open source funding comes from right now is scratch your own itch funding. So at its core, I'm doing some development. These tools are terrible. This should have been a better abstraction. It's not. The best example actually is Git, right? Because Linus Torvalds was developing a Linux kernel and got kicked off of Bitmover. So he was like, fuck, I need a version control system that doesn't suck. So he scratched his own itch and built Git. And today we have this at a larger scale with corporations scratching their own itch. So Google is like, well, we need better machine learning software, so let's build TensorFlow and let's control the network effect by open sourcing it, because there's going to be an open source option. But what we don't see is, except for crypto is a really weird one that I think points in a different direction. But except for crypto, you don't see open source projects flourishing that are potentially liberative against the corporate agenda. You'll see stuff that makes it really efficient for AWS to run servers, but you won't see an open source Google search or an open source Facebook attracting massive amounts of funding and attention. And I think that's what we should be aiming for. We should be trying to essentially replace the entire world of corporate controlled software, where they own your data, they own your relationships, they own the algorithms that control what you're going to see and where you're going to be directed, and move to a world where it's feasible to fork Facebook or fork Twitter, or just say, all these policies are wrong. I want to keep the social graph. I want to keep the APIs, and I want to run my own implementation and logic. So that's where I want to see enormously flourishing, what I would call economically exothermic open source.
Economically exothermic.
Yeah.
Nice.
So things are economically exothermic when they throw off money, and then the more resources that go into them, the more resources they accumulate to then reinvest. And this is what we see with the tech giants, right? The more that people use Facebook, the more economic value is created, and the more that Facebook reinvests in building a bigger ecosystem and moat for itself. But right now, the open source projects are economically endothermic, because the more you want to scale them, the more you need some other person to be willing, for their own reasons, to put money into it. And then we're not going to see open source that's really challenging to the power structures. except of course crypto, which is economically exothermic because it literally like makes mints money. So I want to get more open source projects to feel like crypto in the sense that everyone is flocking to like quit their day job at Google because working on open source like makes money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that concept is really important because it touches on something else that I think all of you guys have mentioned in each of your sentences, the concept of value capture. And value capture isn't just making money, but it's capturing value, and it's being able to, like you said, something that is constantly outputting energy, it's capturing it and using it to grow more. So I guess you just pitched a vision of an image, like you said in your tweets, right? An image of open source sustainability. Do both of you agree with that image of open source sustainability? Like, how do you see open source communities and the free and open source world growing and evolving? We'll get into crypto specifically, but kind of now, and as we see in like just traditional digital infrastructure, what is your image for open source sustainability and how it evolves?
I mean, I think that it's, snaps for we should aim higher than sustainability. We should maybe title the panel How to Thrive as an Open Source Developer, not just sustain yourself, tread water. I do think that there's a fundamental value misalignment with the tech giants. We'll just pick on them since we opened that line of attack. But I mean, I think that they're fundamentally extractive, and you don't realize how much you're paying with your data with the existing tech giants. And I'm really excited for a world where the users of these networks are also the investors of the network, and there's a alignment of incentives for the users for the managers of that company to not have to choose between the users and the investors and just choose for that one actor doing what's right for the world. And there's a real problem with externalizing harm in existing business models, in my opinion. And we see that every time there's a data leak and your social security number gets leaked out on the internet. And there's when you pay with your data for these free services and then that gets leaked out to Cambridge Analytica or whatever, then that's an externalization of harm. And so I think sustainability I'm hopeful that world will change with crypto.
Yeah, and I agree with what both Dandelion and Kevin said. To add a little bit more context on that is thinking about where we're coming from and where we're going, right? Like, we have free software, like money and open source, working together pretty much. And then we have the open source movement at the beginning, similar story. Recently, the last year, we saw a lot of success stories on the open source world. Most of them are under this whole, the business model behind this is open core, right? And the idea of open core is that you basically pretty much have an open code base at the core of it, and then additionally you have, paid services. The problem that this business model have and the opportunity I think for crypto and the way forward is that particularly what's going on there is that what is financially sustainable is against the community values. Right, so basically some of the community values, like basically the communities are not sustainable, and for anyone that has developed open core, you know this, that the challenge that you have to face is like, where do you slice? Like how am I gonna slice something that what the community has is good enough, and then basically what the corporations have, and that sounds simple, but in practice, usually, you want to make the experience a little bad, so people will pay for this, right? You have this constant battle between like what goes for free and what goes behind the paywall, and pretty much eventually this is a clash between values and money, right? And I think what Dandelion said is, I agree, this is the bigger opportunity for crypto to come in and provide the business model for this and thrive, not just continue to be this thing on the side that somehow maintains us with a lot of compromises. Yeah.
Well, I think that the common theme is that crypto changes the concept of open source sustainability. So in your words, why does it, and what does it change about it? I mean, I think that there's a lot about incentives that we're touching on, right. But how has it impacted the open source world in your perspective?
I can throw a bunch of stuff. So
throw it out.
Okay, yeah. So as they come to my head. So the first one is cultural. Okay, so I always say that, look at the blockchain movement. The blockchain movement is the first time that we have a big technology wave that's almost exclusively open source. It's the first time in history. We never had anything like that. Meaning that in all big trends in the past, most of these trends were, most of the bigger companies, success stories in there, were all, closed source companies. Now, for the first time ever, we have don't know where the market caps for crypto are today.
I don't want to know.
These are like, let's say, 200 billion exclusively in open source software. And culturally, that has a lot of implications, meaning that these people developing free and open source software, making money through the way that they have engineered their economic incentives, now they're much more likely to give back, right? And also to spend more time, want to contributing to the commons, want to give back. So that's the first thing that I think is interesting. The second thing that I think is interesting is this whole idea of deplatformizing. You know, like Stallman, like when we're speaking with him, he was like, yeah, how, like basically Stallman was like, how do you explain this Web3 thing? Like, I don't get it, what is this?
Yeah, for background, Stallman couldn't read the Web3 Summit program that he was speaking at because it was using...
Node-free.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really hard to even talk about Web3 with Stallman,
right.
Which is pretty funny.
And eventually after, like, we explained to him, eventually he was like, okay, it's deplatformizing, I guess. And we were like, yeah, that's kind of close. You know, it's a lot of things, but that's one of them. So the second opportunity there is indeed deplatformizing and envisioning this world where some of these platforms that, became the norm, the Web 2.0 world where you would have a lot of different actors in them, developers, communities built on top of them, users, all of that, aligned behind a very old school business model where only the one side sees the profit of that and the rest basically you extract from them. So the opportunity with Web3 I think is specifically that, like as with deplatformizing and really thinking some of these platforms we use day to day, potentially to reward some of the infrastructure that goes with that, some of the communities that come with that. So that's the second way that I think that crypto is changing the game. And then the third one is like generally coordination problems now are at the core. I think that's our biggest contribution to the world, which is, it's not just tech. Now we're thinking deeply about coordinating different actors around tech. So hopefully that's also going to lead to incentivization for some of these actors that have until now didn't find a way to be incentivized.
Yeah, we can program our values into our money so we can make our economic incentives to match our values.
Yeah.
Although I do have to say that I don't think that the crypto space is perfect right now. And these are aspirational, I think, in a lot of ways. And I like thinking from first principles about how this is going to change the world over several decades, because it's a source of hope for me in what's been a tough market in the crypto space for the last, let's call it 9 months. I do think that the open source financial system is a lot of ways like the traditional financial system was when it first launched, when you saw the launching of the New York Stock Exchange. And in that there's a lot of scams, and they've ruined it for the quality projects. I mean, a lot of ICOs that didn't deliver, and therefore retail investors got burned, and it's going to take a little while for us to all recover for that. But I do think if you look at it on a multi-decade time horizon, then I'm pretty hopeful that it's going to be a net positive for the world. And I'd really like to see the token buyers have some level of sophistication or tools to help them become sophisticated so that they can tell the shitcoins from the projects that are truly innovating and solving coordination problems.
So talk about the
There's someone, are you doing audience questions? 'Cause
yeah, absolutely. Throw it out. Go for it.
Roll up your sleeves.
Oh, here we go.
So can we talk about how a large portion of the open source community hates crypto?
I was just going to bring up the same thing.
Well, I got there first.
Oh, do you want to switch?
Why do you think that they hate crypto?
Because I talk to people in person, and I have a long history in open source, and a lot of people...
I confirm.
Yeah.
I confirm.
Sure, not like why do you think that, but why do you think that those people hate crypto? What are their complaints about it?
Well,
It's scammy, yeah?
I can give you one answer that might satisfy Boris. So the reason why a lot of engineers hate crypto is because with what happened in 2017, we had a lot of money and a lot of people making money really quickly on technology that didn't make sense. And these are engineers, right, that like basically look at the thing and say, this makes no fucking sense, right? Like, and we had a lot of that, and this is the case. And I think that's always healthy, and like with my co-founder many times we joke about Hacker News, and like anyone that have posted your thing on Hacker News, that's a war zone right now. Like if you post a crypto thing, it's very rare that you're gonna get traction there because of that. Now, what's the way forward with that thing? I think a lot of us and a lot of people in the space learned their lessons in 2017 that blockchain is an exciting tool but doesn't solve every problem, right? And I think that the narrative right now, especially in the Web3 space, is widening a little bit. It's becoming much more about decentralization, not just blockchain maybe, right? You see a lot of innovation peer-to-peer, you see a lot of innovation federated stuff. So I believe that eventually the vision that we're pursuing for the web is appealing to every engineer, right? That's my feeling. Now, I think we have to get there, we have to see like tech, we have to show them that indeed this whole space is a lot more things rather than just blockchain, and I believe that eventually a lot of engineers will be there. And I think we also see early signs, right? A lot of engineering talent basically leaving the valley to join, crypto projects. So we have early signs, but also we should see both the pluses and the minuses there, the goods and the bad.
Yeah. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and if 80% of projects are shitcoins that don't make any sense in 2017, then I can see why people have that perception. But I think that we're going to see a growing amount of sophistication and ability to tell between the bad projects and the ones that truly could solve coordination problems. I hope, at least.
But to put the question back to you, what have you seen? Why, when you ask why do people feel that way about crypto, what do you?
I think of it as we're using the word we a lot, and we're using the word Web3, and I worry that by being very positive, it actually does very little to onboard people who have not bought in. So maybe I'm posing it more as a challenge. I have many colleagues that I've built software with in the last decade in an open source style. And when we were building 15 years ago, that was in the middle of fighting against Microsoft and others. We won from the perspective of 2019, where water is wet and most software is open source. And what I've been finding is that many people in crypto have come from a crypto direction, not from an open source direction. And so there's tension in there. I don't know how to solve it, but that there needs to be more learning on both sides of what that means. And I feel like many people in open source, having thought that they won, have become blind to the fact that they've become recaptured by corporations. Because we've actually moved away from more radical licenses. And so that's the problem space that I'm spending time thinking about. I don't really answer, but if we don't focus on it, we won't work on it.
I mean, it seems to me that we're starting to see signs that the existing institutions of surveillance capitalism are sort of crumbling, and we talked about deplatforming. Those are every time someone's deplatformed from a site, it can be a sort of like black swan event, like a marketing event. And I also think that every time there's a data leak from Equifax or haveibeenpwned.com, I get an email from them once a week, and it's just a sign that the existing institutions are the way the status quo is not working. And so I think that those are opportunities to remind people that we can build a new trust model, a more radical licensing scheme, in your words, for how we distribute value in software, and it's an arbitrage between those two things, in my opinion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think specifically to the, on the one hand, with the people being super skeptical of crypto, one of the interesting and in many ways unfortunate aspects of crypto is that it's really good at producing armies of incentivized shills or shitcoins. It's like arguably like the one thing that crypto has really figured out is how to incentivize people to shill. We're working on building incentives for things other than shilling, and those are we've got nascent progress. But I kind of feel like right now, what we don't actually need to go and persuade the rest of the world to get on board with crypto. And the people who do actually need to do that are the people who have shitcoins to unload. So I like try to avoid even looking like these people. What I would rather do is say, okay, we've got enough people who are interested and have a ton of talent. We've got really interesting experiments to do. You know, DAOs we're making, new like coins we're making that have got like really like thoughtful like systems involved. So I don't care at all if Hacker News is full of comments saying this is all crap. Let's just like make something that's so obviously not crap that wins people over, rather than trying to persuade them. I agree.
Yeah.
Show, don't tell.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's also like tons of hype around it, tons of shitcoins, right? But there's also like tons of money flowing. And an observation that there's a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot of private capital that is now directed down one funnel, which is towards a certain space, right? Which is this kind of concept of Web3, right? And it's something that is very interesting because again, Web3 is very much so, the majority of it is open source, potentially all of it, right? What is your perspective building in the Web3 space of how that value is being distributed across open source? So Protocol Labs, Parity, Ethereum Foundation, how are we looking at the Web3 space and the money that's flowing? Is it sustaining open source? Is this a new mode of sustainability that we're witnessing? Or, or we look at governance and DAO experiments, right? Mm-hmm. How do we see the value distribution evolving in the Web3 space? Go ahead.
So I think that we should really be, the thing that I'm very excited about for source cred is that at the end of the month, we're going to start just paying people based on cred. Source cred gives you scores based on contributions you've made, and we'll start initially with very small amounts of money, just like seeing what happens when we incentivize people in this way. I think that on the one hand, we've been very good at generating new pots of money based on interesting open source experiments. Mm-hmm. I think, for example, Decred is this very interesting project where it's a DAO. They don't have like a corporation paying people salaries. They just all do like on-chain voting about which proposals to fund and then pay the people who did that. And they don't really need to go and like they can just create their token and then people can organically flow economic value into it by buying the token. Mm-hmm. I think on the other hand though, most of the ways that we're funding this open source development is that we have some like centralized companies spring up and then go and hire people full-time to pay salaries. Yeah. And I feel like there we're just like not leveraging the opportunities that the medium has very well, because we should be finding ways to like in a more permissionless, more decentralized, much lower friction way, use the tools of crypto to enable the development of crypto.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I will take contrarian, not with Dandelion, but with you that a lot of money has been flowing. Like we're actually just before we were discussing it with Philip and with Temu that, especially the last year and a half, I think the narrative on the crypto space is DeFi, right? This is the thing that most investors finance right now. The Web3 thing, I will tell you that like probably 95% of the investors right now are like, there's no narrative yet. Not sure that I'm gonna make a play, right? So and DeFi is interesting. Don't get me wrong, not my thing specifically, but that's flying right now. I think on the Web3 space, I think we have stagnation, and we have stagnation for the reason you explained before. We haven't shipped yet stuff to get people excited. We haven't showed enough progress. So I think where we are pretty much is still on experiments. We're just pursuing interesting experiments, and I think this is really, really valuable. Like a lot of things come to mind. But yeah, hopefully some of these experiments will become something meaningful, and then we will convince the next wave of users and investors channeling money to that. Dandelion, I think, mentioned Decred and block rewards. I think quite some money has been going through that. So Nadia, that is at Protocol Labs, she has been writing a lot about the space. She recently wrote a blog post comparing different grants programs. One was from DAS, another one was from Monero, the third one, I don't remember where it was, maybe it was Decred. But there are a bunch of different experiments there, like for money coming from block rewards, and I think that's fascinating. Yeah. And then you also try to pull the same thing on Ethereum, right?
I don't know if I tried to pull it on Ethereum, but I did propose block rewards funding on Ethereum, yes.
And didn't.
That's a whole long conversation. Yeah.
Okay.
That's you can talk about it now or after, but.
Yeah, well, so the question was, how is value flowing to open source developers?
Yeah.
So I like to make this analogy when thinking about this. It's very hard to think about how something in the future is going to change because hindsight's 2020 and the future is very hard to reason about. And I like to use the parallel of the first web as a way of reasoning about the web of money and how things are going to change. In the famous example that I always talk about is the difference between Yahoo and Google. If you've ever seen Yahoo's original product, they basically created a directory, a taxonomy of all the information out there, and you had to traverse the directory in order to find a sports site. You would go into sports, and then American sports, and then football, and then the San Francisco 49ers. And Google invented this fundamentally new interface, the search box. It's very simple. And you can just type in 49ers and you can find the information. And so Yahoo took the library card catalog system and just put it on the web, whereas Google invented a fundamentally web-native way of finding information. And so, the internet changed the way the world works because of the ability for computers to send information across a network. I think that blockchain is going to change the way the world works because you can send financial value across a network. And so, Dandelion, to your point, the way open source software value accrues right now is very centric around, what do we call it, like tech giants, incentives, and like where developer attention is. And I think that, and that's an approximation of how to sustain open source, and I think that in a lot of ways it's working as long as the tech giants' incentives are aligned with the rest of the users. In a lot of places they're not. But I'm really excited about what both of you are doing because I think that OS Rank is a fundamentally Web3 native way of aligning incentives between open source creators and the rest of the world. And whatever the answer is to what's going to solve this problem, it's going to probably be Web3 native because we can program our values into our money in this new paradigm.
Can I build on that?
Yeah.
So I think one of the interesting things that happens periodically in technology is that you take something that already existed and reduce its cost by an order of magnitude, and then get totally different emergent behavior and totally different phenomena. And an example is encyclopedias already existed for a very long time. People would write articles, you'd have a group of people write all the articles, put them together in a book, ship them out. Then we got this new technology in the internet that reduced the cost of moving information between people by an order of magnitude, or maybe two. And you get a radically different interpretation of what an encyclopedia is, where everyone is just throwing information together at like really high rates and there's no permissioning, and somehow it produces a massively better encyclopedia in Wikipedia. And I think similarly, like open source as it exists today came about, is not really imaginable without the internet. Because if you have to be mailing the patches as like physical reefs of paper and then somebody reads it and like copies it back and gets a floppy disk, the coefficients of friction are so high that you don't get the dynamics of open source of just people around the world forming these ad hoc communities to contribute their great cool ideas in. And I think that crypto has a potential to do the same thing in that the costs of coordinating flowing value in the old style world is really high. You hire lawyers, you choose a state to incorporate it, you do payroll, you pay taxes. And so having like ad hoc like economic collectives around open source projects is not feasible because who's going to hire all these lawyers, which domain do you put it in? It's too much of a pain. And so I think we're still mostly seeing these like, the library card model of paying open source developers where, okay, we'll get the money, we'll form a corporation in Zug, Switzerland, and then we'll pay salaries to you. But I think that this is just because the space is so new. And through systems like OS Rank and like experiments in the space, we're going to see the order of magnitude lower cost, therefore totally different collective behavior, economic models for open source.
I love this point. This is fascinating. I'm trying to think instantly like, okay, what are the barriers today? I think like you can imagine a world where like there's a DAO of people writing open source software that somehow receives rewards from all the treasuries potentially. Like, so we need interrelational communication for something like that to happen. Still some of these components are not there. But yeah, this is a fascinating vision if you start pursuing it in a crypto native way, not in a Web 2.0 native way.
I mean, it's offering a new design space to be programming values, re-engineering incentives to show how things can be built like they weren't before, right? But these are pretty radical views of, it's really presenting a lot of behavior change, right? And it's experiments. But I guess my question is like, what are the problems that you face? What are the barriers that are being faced right now besides, technological things that need to happen to make certain things possible? But like, what are the challenges that are facing open source sustainability right now that's limiting experiments from becoming standards that people in the open source community can look at and say, oh yes, that's something I'm going to buy into?
Well, for my part, what I really wanted to do, like 2 years ago when I quit Google and was like doing this crypto thing, what I wanted to do was create a token for every project, let every project create its own token that acts as like a proof of contribution or proof of support for the project. Set up norms in the space where every project is going to mint these tokens continually, give them to contributors. The contributors can sell them, thus like letting people buy in by funding the development. And then every project is going to flow some of their tokens upstream to the holders of the tokens and their dependencies. So you have a like native structure that reflects the value chain of open source where everyone gets value from their dependencies. You now then flow the tokens back up to reflect that.
Yeah.
And what I figured out was that we can't actually build that right now because we have no idea how to give the tokens to open source developers in a way that doesn't lead trivially to like awful gaming and ruining the community.
Yeah.
This is actually like a pretty fundamental point. The reason why proof of work works and you can secure a crypto network with proof of work is that the act of creating a new block on one of these networks is fundamentally provable that the work was done. And when it comes to software development, it's this abstract and dimensional space where like I think I'm building a treehouse and you think that I'm building you a tractor, and like everyone has all these subjective views of it, and so it's very hard to prove work in software development, and so it's subject to gaming and subjectivity. We just don't have the tools and the coordination mechanisms to solve that just yet. It seems like they're coming.
Yep, I fully agree with what both of them said. I think, I want to point out still it's the coordination problems. Like I think a lot of these experiments, you see them in action and then usually they come across very similar challenges. Like one classic thing is Libre, for example, like Facebook. Classic problem that we have in mechanism design is how do you go from a closed cartel to an open group of participants coordinating, right? That's a problem that we see across like in many DAO setups, in many mechanisms have a DAO at the core and things around it. So I think we're still quite early in that sense. We need to see experiments and progress on mechanism design, and then also the stacks. If there's one centralized computer that works, maybe another one now with Cosmos, right? Like still the infrastructure is not there. It's a long game. Like I think we should all feel okay with that and keep pursuing this experiment because it's a very long game. There are many blockers now just one.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the key value, the asset that crypto brings to the table is being able to coordinate in a different way, but also the biggest problem that comes from crypto is how hard it is to coordinate in different ways, right? Yeah. So it's hard to, and I feel what you guys have been saying is that experimentation is the best way to figure that out. And keep experimenting in value distribution and coordination to actually test and see how to solve those problems because we don't really know right now.
That's right. And go ahead.
So I think crypto is additionally hamstrung by a devotion to a certain kind of purity, which is the purity of not having humans in the loop.
Yeah.
But an insistence on having every single hard situation be solved through software, even if this results in hundreds of millions of dollars of funding that were clearly intended for one project, and there was like a glitch in a contract, and then having a human in the loop or having some social system to reverse these would compromise the purity of having a 100% software system. And so we would rather amputate off the foot. And I think that we should be a lot like scrappier in the experiments. We should be a lot more willing to have systems that have got trusted agents, provided that it's like an open system where you see how to fork out the agents or how to replace the agents. And I think a good example is MakerDAO. In a more even purity-obsessed world, we would say we can't do MakerDAO because we don't have decentralized price oracles yet. So let's stop this whole experiment. But at a certain point, we need to be willing to make compromises. We need to be willing to say that, we're not designing the perfect system that we imagine having, but we're going to get something that's good enough to work well enough to get us forward to like one more interesting experiment after that.
A friend of mine has an explanation for this. He basically says that until now everything that's happening on crypto tries to replicate what Bitcoin did. It's almost like Bitcoin is a ceremony, and like when you start a new project, everything is to follow the rituals, And indeed, proof of work is beautiful from a game theory standpoint, and then all of us that we want to experiment with human input in decentralized systems. You always end up comparing with but not exactly as regards the proof of work, and then many people say okay, give up there. Funny enough, we've been doing a lot of research on the topic for the team, and specifically on that point on human input in decentralized networks, and it was a little bit disappointing. Even there, we didn't find a lot of stuff. We end up looking at Civil for the people that know that project. We end up looking at Blockstack, where it has idea about mining, how they slice the pie.
Yeah.
And then eventually what happened, just for the sake of the exercise, right now we're actually looking at Wikipedia. We went back to Wikipedia, let's try to see what the hell can we learn from all of these experiments of collaborations here, right? More in the world.
No?
I forgot what the question is. What's the question?
I mean, I kind of did too. It was more so, I can pair it in with the next question that I was saying. Okay, so we're talking about experimentation, right? But I think that if you keep experimenting and you don't have an idea of where your results are going, right? So we're experimenting to new visions of sustainability. How do you keep those experiments relevant while growing the open source space? I guess, how are we evolving collectively towards open source sustainability instead of just with totally scrappy experimentation is so great to keep the momentum going, but how should we and what are all of you doing to be collectively building towards open source sustainability as a general goal, and how does that apply outside of the Web3 space as well?
You added a lot of things in there.
I know, I did. I just kept going.
Okay.
Start from the beginning of collectively building towards open source sustainability.
I think that just talking about the problem is an important thing, and not to be a downer, but there's people who have a ton of influence on the modern web through the work that they've done in open source, and just highlighting their stories and doing research on them and interviewing them is an important thing. Pia Mancini of Open Collective started the Sustain Summit out of, and I think that's kind of become the gold standard of a meetup where people are designing in that space. And so I think it's a collective conversation that we should all be having, and people like us sitting on panels like this and discussing it and sharing results in an open way it seems like the way that we're gonna move forward together.
I agree with that. I want to say embracing subjectivity. And what I mean by that is that, the example that I always give is that, again, is the Yahoo Google thing, which is, when Google came out, basically defining relevance for some of these websites, it's a subjective call, right? But they just came and did it so much better than anyone else. And I think a lot of the problems that we're facing, for example, on our side, with OS rank, right? Obviously it's a subjective call. The good side, the good thing that we have is that, realistically today, very few projects getting paid in such a native crypto way for their open source work. So we basically competing with very little, right? So even if we don't get that right, basically, some of the experiments that Libre does, for example, or it does, these are very fascinating experiments that give confidence to people to keep experimenting. And so we have to embrace subjectivity rather than actually try to find objective solutions, because for some of these problems, that doesn't exist, right? We can't quantify, value here. Philosophically, I don't think that it's extremely difficult to actually slice it somehow, right? So, yeah.
Do you have something to say on that, or no?
I'm just trying to hack on the small experiment.
Yeah, I know you are, absolutely, which is still good. I think you just see, I guess it's just kind of figuring out what we're building towards, right? Like what is the goal? And it is to have open source sustained. Is that to have everybody paid? Is that to have open source communities functioning as their own organizations, and kind of experimenting towards that overall goal, which I personally think is very valuable.
Yeah, I think that one way you can express it is that I want more software developers to come into the Web3 space because it aligns with their values and they realize they can actually pay their mortgage by doing work that aligns with their values. That's sort of one of the North Stars that I think about. And I think that like with OS rank, if people realize that, I can actually pay my mortgage by just maintaining this open source project and I don't have to like write a book or go give talks at conferences that are paid or sell consulting on top of my work, and I can just actually code and get paid for it, then that's the North Star for me.
I agree with that. Cool. So let's open it up to a general discussion because I'm sure you guys have a lot to ask and say while we have time left. So does anybody want to? I saw your hand up first. Yeah.
So I've been playing with this idea of answerability. I work in marketing, brand equity is this incredible power that consumers can use to change the way that companies behave. In the 90s, we all remember when we were upset that Nike used sweatshops, and our actions as consumers changed that. Now we're looking at Stripe and saying like, hey, you're letting Nazis get money on your platforms. So we can look at Stripe and we can try to convince them using brand equity and that discussion to respond. The way I heard this discussion today was about like, well, how do we ensure that developers are still interested in working on open source projects when they're not incentivized properly? And how can we use crypto to solve that? But it seems to me that the greater risk to open source is how it affects the larger world. And I wanted your comments on that.
Yeah, I agree with the statement. I think that, again, like looking at the definition of free software, like it's by design, it's political, right? Like meaning that you have this freedom, these are your values, you start from those. And I agree that you're absolutely right with the statement that, okay, software is eating the world, as people like to say, like, what is really going on there? Like, how is this going on? How does the process go on? I think like it's implied from us, but like the ability to release software that has certain values by design, I think that's a positive thing, like giving everyone the ability to actually modify the software and do whatever they want. This is a positive thing, and that's a political thing. With open source software spreading or free software spreading, I think we have that, right? Now, how, like you mentioned a bunch of very specific examples, like it's difficult one. I don't know if I have the perfect answer for you, but again, through decentralization, these thousands of communities actually defining their own values and being able to actually like live with that on their own digital world when we're talking about open source. So yeah, I think that's what we're optimizing for.
Yeah, I think that what you just said with your North Star being that people can build open source, that people can spend time on their free software and survive and thrive, not just survive, thrive, is the beauty of open source sustainability. And I feel like that concept in itself is a huge impact on the world. If you're able to, be able to work for what you believe in and what you value and thrive is really impacting the world in a really great way that we don't have right now.
Yeah.
It seems to me that the danger,
Yes, go ahead, please.
It seems to me that the danger of that is that bad actors can also concentrate and use it in a way that, and in an open source community, you cannot point at someone and say, like, you need to deplatform this person or this group.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about how the rest of the world, those of us who are witnessing horrors, are going to react to open source communities where no one no one has any control.
Can I answer?
Yes.
I think this is a small problem in open source because precisely you can form the projects. So if you cannot take someone from the, if someone that is leading a project is not aligning with the needs of the community, what the community does is it scratches its own need, forks the code and keep on going, and we have several examples of this. So I don't think it works in the same dynamics as with corporations.
Yeah, I wanted to add the exact same point that the most powerful thing that free and open source software has is the ability to exit, right, and take the thing with you and do something else with it, which is what you described. So yeah, I think that's quite powerful. Yeah.
Going back to your idea of creating a tokenizing, do you think that it was not a problem of promoting that token in a more open way rather than having, so for example, like if you had like a Kickstarter for all the projects so that you can get a wider promotion of your project, then that would bring in capital into that project to create value for that token. And that probably that token would work whether or not the outcome was really what it is, or not, kind of like Kickstarter in a way. So,
I don't think I quite understood the question.
so in your model of creating a token for each project, so announcing it, so maybe the big problem with the open source community is that it's not like Kickstarter where we know about the projects. People who are not developers know nothing about the projects. And so if there was some sort of Kickstarter where we can, or maybe even on Kickstarter, we can actually see that that we can actually contribute to a token to create a project, then maybe that model would work, your original idea would work,
So I think that it's like, it depends on what you mean by work and on what time frame things are working. You could certainly make it and say, I control this project, I'm going to make a token, I'm going to give it mostly to myself and to my friends on the project, and I'm going to sell it on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And you may make a bunch of money in the short term, but will you wreck your open source community? Will it be the case that everyone who wasn't you felt that they got screwed over because you do too much and they want to fork it? Or was it the case that now everyone who might come and contribute next week says, this is super fucked up, this person.
Yeah, but then if you tokenize, you can actually distribute based on a kind of quantity of work or hours.
Right, but now you're creating really, let's say that you did it based on the number of commits. Now, if I was going to come and do some work, I say, I could split this up into 17 commits. First, I needed to refactor the interface, then I create the new implementation of that new interface, then I migrate the existing user of the interface, then I deprecate the old interface. I could make an arbitrary number of lines of code or commits or any other thing.
That's right.
And so now these projects, instead of actually building open source, are going to get wrapped up in these games for the tokens.
One of the things that I think is really interesting development is the continuous funding models, whereas in 2017 we would see project raise $15 million and then they would either deliver or not, depending on lots of circumstances. But continuous funding is a way of allowing projects to raise continuously, and the early investors get higher upside but higher risk, and as the projects are de-risked, the price goes up and the potential return goes up, but the risk goes down also. And so I think that's one way you're going to see incentives more aligned in the future.
Absolutely.
Can I actually go back though to the question about open source and how do we deplatform the people that we really don't want on the platform? I think that right now we have centralized power. And that centralized power makes it possible to do things like kick off the Nazis. And fortunately, we have people who are controlling those levers of power that are pretty ideologically aligned with us. But that is not a guarantee at all from the system. And so the possibility of kicking off the Nazis admits also the possibility that the Nazis find a way to take over the centralized power, and then we're all uber fucked. And so I think the reason that I want decentralized systems is that I'm willing to accept a higher rate of people that I hate or abhor getting access to the systems in exchange for the fact that the people I hate or abhor will never completely dominate the system in the way that they otherwise could. So I'm willing to accept a lot of small bads to make sure that 1984 never happens, in essence.
Okay, so a small pivot outside of that, but I definitely struggle with this concept that opt-out culture is, by nature, even outside of technical barriers of entry, is something that people who are already steeped in the developed world can really opt out of, and they can learn about it and get out involved. But it's for you, Dandelion, I think, specifically, but obviously all of you. I'm fascinated by the idea of small experiment funding for people who are committing to open source projects. And I kind of just more interested in how do you guys feel in any way, how do you encourage or connect in a way kind of like with this brand identity thing, instead of like maybe all of us getting mad about something, how do you connect developers who have talent, who see the struggle of other developers who are in these areas who aren't able to necessarily opt out of that, out of the centralized power that they're living with, and fund or at least encourage, or in your case, completely throw all at. How do you connect those people, and how do you create an opt-out culture that isn't necessarily dependent on being in a Western culture?
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's look at like the difference between Facebook and Mastodon. So Mastodon is a federated social network. So everyone has their own, people are registered to their own server, and each server gets to decide basically which servers do they want to talk to. You can't opt out of Facebook a little bit. You can't say, I want to have access to all these people, but I disagree with certain policies and I want those policies enforced differently. If Facebook decides that nipples are like verboten and evil, then there's no way that your nipple enthusiast community or whatever thing gets banned. I recognize those are a weird one, but female nipples are like censored on Facebook. There's no way that you can locally say, hey, we collectively think this is fucked up. We want to be able to express something. I want to keep this social graph, but apply my own set of values to it. So there's no opting out unless you disconnect, and disconnecting is really, really hard. So what I imagine is that by making these things open systems, we get to a point where different communities can decide what their values are and have a more local ability to opt in and opt out. Now that means that there are going to be communities with important values. And I propose that we should all, we the people who don't want that can all go and agree that our servers are not going to talk to their servers. But as soon as you have the ability for the one Mark Zuckerberg of the world to decide what is and isn't abhorrent, you really better hope that you either are Mark Zuckerberg or he just happens to like all the same things as you, not for now, but to time immemorial. And I think that ultimately we'll wind up building more and more governance systems on top of these technologies. And I think that we probably, hopefully we will, use the experience of crypto to, I like to joke that we're right now living with the best governance systems that you could design using 18th century understanding of game theory and information processing. And so we could plausibly go ahead and build just way better governance that will actually square this circle and let us have a robust way of policing the commons in a way that doesn't easily collapse into tyranny. But until then, I want fork and exit more than I want the ability to get every bad actor out of the platform.
So you're saying a coalition between both hardware managers and software enthusiasts?
I'm saying I'm thinking of stuff like quadratic voting, where if you look at democracy as it's implemented right now makes it easy for minority interests who have a very strong opinion to capture the outcomes. And you look at stuff like the impossibility of passing even the smallest gun control legislation in the United States, even though most people would like more background checks, because minority interests can get disproportionate power. Now, political scientists are coming up with mechanisms that don't have these bugs, and so we can start to try to use that to design better systems of governance.
I want to get out.
Yeah, so you guys want to reflect on that more, or?
I mean, I can add one small, very different thing. Again, coming from our conversation with Salman, he was we were talking about sustainability, and he was free software movement is not interested in sustainability. Free software movement is interested in fairness, he said. And, and then basically we were but wait, there are less people burning out, there are less people suffering. And his take on that was that, basically, then let's educate, let's support them. Basically, his whole thing was that money is not an answer for everything, right? So I think that money is the answer for your money problems, right? So that's one thing. But I think there's also that component that you're bringing up of actually supporting developers and being there, educating them that hey, you don't have to be exploited, you can say no to things and it's okay, the world will move on, because people can actually afford the software and can do things. So there's this whole aspect of it, which I guess somehow adds maybe something to your question. I don't know. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, on the topic of how you can opt out of Facebook, I find that sci-fi is extremely generative of new ideas and visions of how the future could be. And I just read this book called Kill Process by William Hertling about a decentralized Facebook, which was a protocol that allowed you to opt in to different newsfeed algorithms and different profile algorithms and messaging protocols, opt in and out, and you could always take your social graph with you. And I just thought it was neat to see someone who sketched out that vision. So maybe worth checking out.
Nice. Yeah?
I just want to make a quick comment about things that came up earlier, that open source developers don't often like crypto. I was wondering if maybe that's because crypto introduces monetary accounting and market relations into something that, correct me if I'm wrong, was originally supposed to be a move away from that.
I would say so and so. I think we are in a phase of like normalization of money within open source communities. Actually, almost every significant open source community usually has a person that's getting paid somehow.
Yeah, that's the reality. The reality is corporations are paying for it, really. So it's not, I don't think, so for me, like, the reason why it was sustainable was because we have corporations paying developers who just happen to make that open source, but then like the hardcore, like, gung-ho, like, I'm going to save the world coder, I really want to meet those people, you know?
They're here in the room with you.
Okay, thanks. That's why I'm here, you know. But those are the people who, like, you know, for me, like that I think that. But for is it sustainable though?
So I wanted to support and kind of answer your question a little bit. So let's talk about it in part, or I'll state a fact, which is the history of open source that is only now starting to change. Is the privileged Western, young, white male, which maybe you were hinting at. I think the other part is if you have the privilege of the free time because someone else, probably female, does your laundry, or you because you can do open source software. We're starting to acknowledge that that is a thing and it exists. And so because we can understand it exists, we can understand that that might change. So I am very interested, rather than raising $10,000 to pay a couple of young white males to work on something for 2 months, I'm exploring at this point a thought experiment, what it looks like. The classic story is that open source is not a job. It's mission, it's ideology, but again, corporations have kind of change the narrative in a way that really supports them. I want to actually bring back the radical. We're in Berlin. Let's get radical. So what if open source is a job? But instead, what if those jobs go to a group of young people in Kampala, Uganda, or to new grads from the University of Algeria, typically about $500 US. So the $2 million that Kevin has deployed through Gitcoin has gone to a relatively long tail of developers because the bar has dropped. So this time, as we're going from Web 2 to Web 3, the whole world is involved because the barrier to entry of Linux, free software, a $40 Raspberry Pi.
That's right.
But we have to keep going. And not hire more people in San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera.
That's my point. That's my point. I think is also these barriers of entry from a hardware perspective that go to these communities are still incredibly high. It's like we're not necessary. I think it's very awesome that the majority of African continent has skipped from the desktop computer to the cell phone. But in reality, we are still not seeing value in giving them hardware that allows them to join such open source communities.
Who's working on developer tools that you can use from your phone?
That's my question.
I'm sure some open source hackers are doing.
Oh, they are.
But no one's sure supporting them,
that's
right?
Why doing is really interesting. From a small experiment perspective, that could be very powerful.
One thing, I think there's a lot of things that are going to need to happen to see this vision come through, but I will say that one of our experiences on Gitcoin has been a strong uptick of people in communities that have hyperinflation or don't trust their local banking system to pass the funds through them. The banks would censor their payments from Western companies for one reason or another, and they can just get paid in crypto in 15 seconds, which I think is an important export. So it doesn't solve the problem, but it certainly helps.
Can I ask how is Bitcoin funded?
Gitcoin's funded by consensus, and
what's consensus of what community is that?
Consensus with a Y, which is Joe Lubin's company for kickstarting Ethereum. But most of the funding on the platform is from people in the Web3 space who want to engage developers from all over the world.
Okay.
So there's funding of us as a company, but then there's the funding of the network, which is more decentralized.
So it's
Can I actually quickly exert my veto power as a moderator and just say one thing to this that I think is really cool about dispersing value and power throughout systems is that when you're able to program the values of subjective systems, you're able to reconstruct the way that internally you distribute value, which is like such a fucking cool part about crypto and all of these things that we're talking about is sustainability is also becoming more representative and equitable based off of the communities, giving the communities the control to distribute value. And that's like really exciting and why I look at crypto and I say, wow, this is giving people and empowering the ability to distribute value in different ways. That was my 2 cents. What's the next question? Go ahead.
Yes, I come from the subscription business so we have a subscription app. And even though for this business you have to pay Facebook first, Google first, then you pay Amazon, and then you pay everything like access, and then you have your money. Even though this situation is the incentive is very high, so it makes sense money-wise, right? We'd love to hear from your side if you see any business model on the subscription for open source. I'm very interested to hear what's your take on this.
Well, we've seen software as a service, right, until now, and some of these projects have been relatively, like they have open source code bases and then usually have a subscription associated with that. I think we've seen a few things there, but the point that I was bringing up, it very much depends on the nature of the technology, right? You have things that actually can fit that model, think database, etc., and then you have other things like libraries that don't fit the model, right? So this whole subscription model. Now, I don't know if I understood your question really well, but you're talking specifically also about crypto and subscriptions? You want to do that?
Yeah.
Well, we haven't seen any of that because, for technical reasons, that's not possible today. I think Handshake is one of the first few protocols that actually have this idea of buying the domain name and then having a refresh rate in there, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'll add more things on that. So there are still limitations on technology for something like that to actually, for the classic subscription model to be implemented.
But I just wanted to interject that I'm the author of the subscription standard on Ethereum, or one of them. And the way we get around that with EIP 1337, the lead standard for subscriptions, is that we sign a meta transaction when we first submit the subscription to the blockchain, and then we basically the payment processor can continue to bill without having to sign another transaction by submitting the meta transaction to the network. So I think that you're right that it hasn't really taken off, and I would really like to see subscription models take off because it's a great way of it's a good business model. It's powered a lot of Web 2.
And you've also done a lot of workshopping on different Web3 business models in general, right?
Yeah, so the ETH Magician's business models ring has come up with lots of different Web3 business models, just tracks them. And if you go to bit.ly/Web3 business models, you can see our 15-page report about different business models in the ecosystem.
So, well, beyond memes and a few other things, I think internet, most valuable product is indeed open source software in a way, as an enabler that connects the world to create and co-create for everyone. So now that we have blockchain and we have crypto, what do you think would be the most valuable product of blockchain connected to that? Do you think we will have some, public free global substrate of tools that would allow value transfer, and it would be like self-funding in a way? Or What's going to be the evolution of open source software with blockchain?
Okay, so there's this parable I really like to tell, which is the parable of the coal mines in the Industrial Revolution. So if you were to transport yourself back in time to the beginning of like the 19th century, say, and you're just starting to get the like earliest experiments in steam engines, you're just starting to get rail and trains. You can look forward into the future and see that this is going to revolutionize like basically all mechanical labor of any kind is going to get revolutionized by steam engines, and railways will become the dominant mode of like intercontinental transport of goods and in many cases people, for centuries to come. But at the time when these technologies were nascent, they were not remotely ready to do any of that, in part because you need a lot of investment before you figure out how to make good steam engines or railways. Like, you need to do things like figure out the Carnot cycle so you get more than like 2% thermal efficiency. And you also need a lot of capital investment because doing things like laying intercontinental railroads is incredibly expensive. And finally, you need to change everyone's expectations and displace the existing networks that are configured around the competitors. So like people have just gone on this canal building craze, for example, in the States. So who wants rail when you've just built perfectly good canals and all of your like shipping and logistics and town hubs are organized around that? And so the way that these technologies got adoption was because there was this need for coal. Because in the UK, at least, they had finished chopping down all the trees that they could chop down to heat London in the winter. So they needed something new to burn in their fireplaces. And so they got coal. And if your goal is to extract coal, then having a 1% steam engine is a great idea because the coal is essentially free, it's on site, and you need to pump water out of the marsh so you can keep on mining coal. And then again, the idea of having like a radically inefficient railway, well, you don't have existing distribution networks going to your coal mines, so why not build a new railway? Because again, you've got the materials on hand, it's cheap. And I think that right now open source is kind of like the coal for crypto in this metaphor. Because on the one hand, it's like a new thing, it's digitally native, it's got all these ways in which it already like matches the like type signature of crypto because it's digitally native, because it's globally distributed. And at the same time, none of our existing value distribution technology works for open source, except in really like crude, like kind of poor fit ways. So I think that if you take like the laughably inefficient, we're at like the vacuum tube stage of crypto and everything is like super fragile and super bulky and might like catch on fire and takes like, 10 years of like artisan work to like craft them out of like finely spun glass. And it turns out that if you take these payment networks, it's like trying to build your intercontinental railroad when you have just iron and not yet steel. Maybe it's a good fit for drugs or other stuff where you can't use the existing infrastructure, but it doesn't really compete with Stripe or Visa on its home turf. And I think that, on the other hand, open source is the home turf for crypto. And so we need to figure out, as we figure out how to make crypto like incentives work for developing open source software, which is actually enormously important in the world, even if it goes under rewarded, that's what will get us the like lived experience and the capital investment that lets us start to make these systems actually like performant and effective enough to work in other domains.
Do you want to talk about the experiment that you're doing at Protocol Labs with SourceCred as something that I think it's like gives people a little bit of a feel of how this future could look like?
Yeah, I had a quick add-on to the coal analogy, because I think we're looking at this as we need to now scale this, and you said how did they find the capital to build this infrastructure? Wasn't that the creation of the joint stock? Like that's when people started putting money into...
Joint stocks were really so we could go and like conquer India effectively, more so than like Industrial Revolution stuff. It was like the big continental trading ships.
Regardless of where it came from, it was a new mechanism of people to pool community funds towards a common goal. We have this in the for-profit system all the time. We have a very effective capital market system that provides funding for companies to provide value. What we need to do is come up with some way of a sustainable funding / membership that basically is a monthly fee to belong in this community that provides your staking for slashing in the case of bad behavior. You can have discount token models for services offered. You can throw in the Harburger tax. You could have collateralized lending based on a funding pool. There's so much potential here for basically an equities market for nonprofit causes and open source components. And that's what we're trying to build with the Common Stack. And we really wanted to come in here and talk with all you guys.